My dad toasted to my best grandkids except him. They laughed at my son because of his condition, so without thinking twice, I slapped him and we left. By morning my dad was demanding an apology in the form of a $2,000 payment. But then nobody warns you that the person who's supposed to protect your kid the most might be the one who hurts him the worst. That's your own father, your own blood, the man who walked you down the aisle and cried, the man who taught you to ride a bike. That same man looked at a backyard full of family, raised his glass, and toasted to all his grandchildren except mine, except my Kale, my beautiful, gentle 7-year-old boy who has autism, and who was standing right there holding my hand, looking up, waiting to hear his name. His name never came. What came instead was laughter, and what came after that was my open palm across my father's face. My name is Opal, I'm 34. And I need to tell you this story because I'm still shaking from it, not from regret, but from everything that happened after, because the slap was just the match. The fire came the next morning when my father had the nerve to demand $2,000 from me, as his apology from me, the woman who had been quietly paying his bills for a year and a half. So, do you want to know what I did? Stay with me. Let me take you back so you understand how we got here. My parents are Rick and Donna. They live about 40 minutes from me outside Raleigh, North Carolina. My dad worked at a distribution center for almost 20 years, before getting laid off about 2 years ago. And my mom's been a part-time receptionist at a dental office forever. They're not wealthy, never were, but my dad always carried this big loud pride around like a trophy. The whole I'm the man of this house energy everywhere he went. My older sister Paige is 37, married to Drew, and they have 2 kids, Belle, 9, and Jackson, 6. Paige is the golden child. Always has been. She married well. Her kids are normal, and I hate that word. And my parents basically worship her. Paige isn't a bad person, but she's the kind of person who sees a problem and looks the other way, because getting involved is uncomfortable. She stays neutral, and in situations like mine, neutral is just a pretty word for letting it happen. Thou killed. My son was diagnosed with autism at 3, and from that day, something shifted in my parents. It was slow, like a leak you don't notice until the ceiling caves in. My mom's first reaction to the diagnosis was, maybe if you'd been more careful with your diet during pregnancy. She said that to me holding the paperwork from the pediatrician, and my dad just nodded. Your mother might have a point. That set the tone for years. Every holiday, every gathering, little jabs. My dad would watch Caleb flap his hands and mutter, "Can't you get him to quit that?" My mom would compare him to Belle and Jackson constantly, and the worst part, Paige's kids picked up on it. Belle told Caleb he was broken at Thanksgiving 2 years ago. I told Paige and she said, "Oh, you know how kids are." Jackson once refused to sit next to Caleb at Christmas, and my dad laughed and said, can't blame the kid for rejecting my son. But I swallowed it every time because I kept telling myself they'd come around, that they eventually see what I see. This incredible boy who memorizes every train route in his picture books, who laughs with his whole body, who tells me, "Mommy, pretty" every morning, even when I look terrible. I thought love would win. I was so wrong. Now, here's something important. About a year and a half ago, after my dad got laid off, my parents started struggling badly, behind on the mortgage, late on car payments. My dad's pride wouldn't let him ask for help. So, who offered me? I started sending $800 a month every month. On top of Caleb's therapy, my rent, everything. I'm a dental hygienist. I do okay, but that money was a real sacrifice. And do you want to know how many times my parents said thank you? 0. It was just expected. Like rent I owed them for being alive. Keep that in mind. Matters very soon. So, Uncle Dean's birthday. My dad's younger brother turned 60 in April, and he and his wife, my Aunt Lorraine, threw this gorgeous backyard party. String lights, catered barbecue, a live band. Uncle Dean is everything my dad is not. Kind, patient, warm. He's the one who gets on the floor and plays trains with Caleb. Ed Lorraine actually researched autism and once called me just to ask, "What does Caleb need from us?" That one question meant more to me than anything my parents ever said. The party started fine. Caleb was nervous in the crowd, but staying close to me. And Uncle Dean wore this goofy cowboy hat and kept tipping it at Caleb, which made him laugh. I was actually relaxed. That should have been my warning. My dad had been drinking hard. By 8 o'clock he was loud and sloppy, hanging on my mom, who just stood there smiling like always. Then he clinked his glass. He wanted to make a toast. About 35 people standing in a circle. Tiki torches, the band paused, and my dad swaying in the center with an overfull wine glass. He goes, and I will never forget this, I want to toast to my family, to my beautiful grandkids, Belle, my princess, Jackson, my buddy, my best grandkids. He paused, looked right at Caleb, who was holding my hand, looking up, waiting to hear his name, and my dad smirked, well, almost all of them, and he laughed, a few nervous chuckles. Aunt Lorraine's face dropped. Uncle Dean set his drink down. Paige stared at the ground. And Caleb looked up at me with those big brown eyes. He didn't understand the words, but he felt it. Kids always feel it. Something snapped. I didn't think. I walked up to my father and slapped him across the face. His glass shattered on the patio. Dead silence. 35 people, and you could hear the wind. Don't you ever talk about my son like that again? I picked Caleb up, grabbed my bag, and walked out. Didn't say goodbye to anyone. Put him in the car seat, sat in the driver's seat, and gripped the wheel because my hands wouldn't stop shaking from the back seat. Mommy sad. No, baby, mommy's just strong. I cried the whole drive home. Now, here's where everything changed. I woke up to 17 missed calls. Mom called 9 times. That for page 3, one unknown number. The first text from my dad sent at 6:47 a.m. You embarrassed me in front of my own brother, and the whole family. You owe me an apology. And for the scene you caused, you owe me $2,000. $2,000 for slapping a man who humiliated my disabled child in front of everyone. He wanted me to pay him. I sat in bed and laughed because what else do you even do with that? My mom's texts were worse. Your father was joking. You know how he gets when he drinks. You need to apologize to him and Uncle Dean for ruining his party. You always make everything about Caleb. I always make everything about Caleb. Him. He's my son. That's literally my job. I didn't respond to any of them. I made Caleb his blueberry smiley face pancakes. We watched cartoons and I sat there thinking because here's what neither of them realized. That $800 I'd been sending every month, the money keeping their mortgage current. I had every receipt, every transfer, and right there on my couch with pancake batter on my shirt and Caleb giggling next to me. I decided the last payment I would ever make was last month's. What happened when that money stopped? I'll tell you everything. Because my dad's reaction was something I could not have predicted. And what Uncle Dean and Aunt Lorraine did next changed the whole game. So I didn't respond to anyone that entire Sunday. Not my dad, not my mom, not Paige. I let my phone buzz itself tired, and by the evening the text had shifted from demanding to threatening. My dad wrote, "If I don't hear from you by tomorrow, I'm coming to your apartment." My mom followed up with, "You're tearing this family apart, Opal. I hope you're happy." And Paige, queen of neutrality, sent one single message. "Hey, just checking in. You okay?" No mention of what Dad said. No acknowledgement of Caleb. Just you. Okay? Like I would have had a bad day at work? I almost responded to Paige. Almost. But I knew the second I opened that door, she tried to play peacemaker, and I didn't want peace. Not yet. I wanted them to sit in it. Monday morning I did something I'd been putting off for months. I opened my banking app, went to the recurring transfers, and canceled the $800 monthly payment to my parents' account. Just like that. Tap confirm. Done. 18 months of helping them. And it ended with one thumb on a screen. I won't lie to you. I felt guilty for about 10 seconds. And then I remembered my dad's smirk when he skipped Caleb's name, and that guilt evaporated like it was never there. Now, do you think my parents noticed right away? Because I figured it would take them at least until the first of the month. I figured wrong. My dad called me Tuesday, not even 48 hours later, not about Caleb, not about the party, not about the slap, about money. He goes, "Oh, I went to check the account and your transfer didn't come through. What's going on? Did your bank mess something up? Like it was a glitch? Like there was no possible universe where I would stop paying voluntarily?" I said, "There's no glitch. Dad, I could have done it." Silence, long silence. "Then what do you mean you canceled it? I mean, I'm not sending money anymore. You want $2,000 from me for standing up for my son? You're not getting 2,000, you're not getting 200, you're not getting 2 cents. He started yelling, and I mean yelling. "After everything we did for you, we raised you, we fed you, we put a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us." The classic script, the greatest hits of guilt, and normally, honestly, normally that would have worked on me. I'm not too proud to admit that. My whole life that speech would make me fold. But something was different this time. Something broke at that party that couldn't unbreak, and sitting there listening to him shout. All I could think about was Caleb's face looking up at me, waiting to hear his name. I said, "Dad, you excluded my son in front of the whole family. You humiliated a 7-year-old child, your own grandson, and instead of apologizing, you asked me for money. So no, we're done." He said, You're going to regret this. I said, maybe, but not today. And I hung up. Within an hour my mom called, crying. Your father is beside himself. How could you do this to us? We depend on that money, Opal. You know that. And then the line that almost broke me. If you loved your family, you wouldn't punish us over a silly joke. Silly joke. My son being publicly excluded from a toast to his own cousins. Silly joke. I told her I loved her but I wouldn't be calling for a while, and I hung up before she could say anything else because if she'd said one more word, I might have caved. That's the honest truth. I'm not some unbreakable superhero in this story. I'm a mom who's terrified she's doing the right thing. Now, here's where things took a turn I genuinely did not see coming. 2 days later, Wednesday evening, I got a call from Aunt Lorraine. I almost didn't answer because I was exhausted from all of it. But something told me to pick up and I'm so glad I did. She said, "Oh, honey, Dean and I need to talk to you. Can we come by tomorrow?" I said sure. And the next afternoon, Uncle Dean and Aunt Lorraine showed up at my apartment with a casserole because Aunt Lorraine is physically incapable of visiting someone without bringing food. It's like a law. And they sat down at my kitchen table and told me something that completely changed everything. Uncle Dean said, "We saw what happened at the party. All of it. And Lorraine and I want you to know that we already told your father he's not welcome at our home until he apologizes to you and to Caleb." I was not expecting that at all. Uncle Dean and my dad are brothers. They've been close their whole lives. For Dean to shut that door was massive. But that wasn't the part that shocked me. Aunt Lorraine leaned forward and said, "There's something else, honey." After the party we started talking to some other family members. "Your dad has been telling people that you are the reason he's struggling financially. He's been saying you promised to help, and then held it over his head. He told your cousin Terrence that you make him beg for every dollar." I felt like the floor dropped out. I had been quietly sending them $800 a month for a year and a half. Never told a soul, never bragged, never even mentioned it to Paige. And my father was out there telling people I was holding money over him that he had to beg. Uncle Dean shook his head and said, "I know your dad. I grew up with him. He's always rewritten history to make himself the victim. But this time, he went too far. And Lorraine and I aren't going to sit by." And then Aunt Lorraine said something that made me cry right there at the table. She said, "Caleb is perfect, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to be in his life, including your father." I didn't even know how to respond. I just sat there with tears running into the casserole. Then Uncle Dean told me their plan. He said, "I'm going to call Rick. I'm going to tell him exactly what I think, and I'm going to make it clear that if he wants a relationship with this family, with me, with Lorraine, with you, with Caleb, he needs to get his act together. No excuses, no I was drunk, no blaming you," and he did. That Friday evening Uncle Dean called my dad. I wasn't on the call, but Uncle Dean told me about it later. And honestly, it was brutal. He told my dad that what he did at the party was the most shameful thing he'd ever witnessed. He told him the $2,000 demand was disgusting. And then he said something that apparently made my dad go completely quiet. He said, "Rick, your daughter has been carrying you financially for over a year. She never told anyone. She never asked for credit. And you stood up at my birthday and humiliated her child. What kind of man does that?" My dad had no answer. Now, you would think that would be the turning point, right? Father gets a wake-up call from his own brother, breaks down, calls to apologize, everybody hugs. That's how it would go in a movie. This is not a movie. My dad's response to Uncle Dean was, "You don't know the full story? Opal exaggerates everything," and he hung up on him. When Uncle Dean told me that, I wasn't even surprised. That's the thing about my dad. He will go down with the ship before he admits he was wrong. And my mom, she backed him up like always. She told Aunt Lorraine that Dean was overstepping and should stay out of it. So now we had a full family divide. Uncle Dean and Aunt Lorraine on my side. My parents dug in on theirs and Paige right in the middle, refusing to pick a side, which at this point was starting to feel like a side in itself. And speaking of Paige, something happened with her that I need to tell you about because it involves her kids, and it forced a conversation I'd been avoiding for 2 years. Paige called me that Saturday afternoon. She said, "Can I come over without Drew, without the kids, just us?" I said, "Fine." She showed up, sat on my couch, and for the first time in this entire mess, she actually looked uncomfortable. Not her usual above-it-all composure. She looked like she had something to say, and didn't know how. Finally she said, "I need to tell you something. After the party, Belle asked me why Grandpa didn't say Caleb's name, and when I tried to explain, Jackson said, 'Because Caleb's weird, right?'" She paused, and then she said, I didn't know what to say, Opal. But as I realized, they learned that from us, from how we've all been acting around Caleb. That was the first honest thing Paige had said to me in years. I didn't yell. I didn't lecture. I just said, yeah, Paige, they did. And I told her that Belle was telling Caleb he was broken 2 years ago wasn't something kids just say. It was something she absorbed from the adults around her. And Jackson refusing to sit next to Caleb at Christmas. Same thing. Paige was quiet for a long time. Then she said, I should have said something at the party. I should have said something a long time ago. I'm sorry. Now, I want to be real with you here. That apology meant something, but it didn't fix anything. Because sorry is a word and words are easy. What I needed from Paige was action. So I told her that. I said, if you mean that, then you need to talk to your kids, not a 5-minute conversation, a real one. About differences, about Caleb, about how treating someone differently because of how their brain works is not okay. She nodded, and I could tell she meant it. But meaning it and doing it are two different things. And I'd been burned too many times to trust a nod. So there I was, financially cut off from my parents, backed by my uncle and aunt, holding a shaky maybe from my sister, and waiting to see if my father would do what he's never done in his entire life. Admit he was wrong. And then something happened that none of us expected. Something that forced my dad's hand in a way nothing else could have. And it had nothing to do with family, nothing to do with the party. Came completely out of left field. And when I found out about it, I sat on my bathroom floor and just stared at the wall for 20 minutes. I'll tell you exactly what it was because this is the part where everything finally broke open. So, remember how I said something came out of left field? Here's what happened. About a week after Uncle Dean's call with my dad, my cousin Terrence, Dean's son, texted me. Hey, can I call you? It's about your dad. Terrence is 31, works in it, and does not do drama. So, I knew it was serious. He said, your dad showed up at my office yesterday asking for a $3,000 loan. Said, you cut him off and he's about to lose the house. My father drove 45 minutes to beg money from a nephew he sees twice a year. That's how committed he was to not apologizing. He'd rather humiliate himself in front of Terrence than say 2 words to me. But honestly, it didn't feel like victory. Made me sick because even after everything, the thought of my parents losing their home gutted me. That's the thing about toxic family. They hurt you and you still don't want them to suffer. I almost called him that night, thumb hovering over the button. Then I looked at Caleb asleep hugging the stuffed train Uncle Dean gave him, and I put the phone down because if I cave nothing changes. Caleb grows up watching his mom accept disrespect. I couldn't teach him that. Now here's where Aunt Lorraine did something nobody expected. Without telling me, she visited my mom not to fight, to talk. She sat her down and said, Donna, I love you, but your grandson has a condition. And instead of embracing him, you and Rick made that boy feel like he doesn't belong in his own family. My mom broke down. Real tears, not the manipulative kind. And she said something she'd never admitted before. I don't know how to connect with him. He doesn't respond like the other kids, and I don't know what to do. That was actually huge because underneath all the jabs was helplessness. She didn't know how to grandmother a child with autism. And instead of asking, she turned confusion into cruelty. Doesn't excuse it, but it explained everything. Then Aunt Lorraine asked, and Rick? My mom said, and this shocked me. I've been telling him for months he's too hard on Caleb. He won't listen to me either. She'd been pushing back behind closed doors, the woman who smiled through every party. Aunt Lorraine said he's about to lose his daughter, his grandson, and his brother. For what? Pride. 4 days later, my mom called quietly. Opal, can I come see Caleb? Not let's talk? Not your father deserves an apology. He asked to see Caleb. She came Saturday, looked exhausted. And this woman who complains about her knees every chance she gets sat on my living room floor and watched Caleb play trains for 10 minutes. Then she picked up a little car and said, which track does this one go on? Caleb took it from her hand, placed it carefully on the right track and said, that one, Grandma. He broke, cried right there on the floor. I'm sorry, Opal. I didn't know how to be what he needed. And I made it his fault. I sat down next to her, and we cried together while Caleb drove trains around us, completely unbothered. That's who he is. The world falls apart and he keeps driving his trains. My dad, though, different story. 3 weeks of silence through my mom and Paige. I knew he was angry applying for jobs and getting rejected. Mortgage letters piling up. He told people I was vindictive. Told Uncle Dean I was using Caleb as a weapon. My son who can't tie his own shoes, apparently my weapon of choice. Those 3 weeks were the hardest of my life because anger fades and underneath is just sadness. I missed the dad who carried me on his shoulders at the county fair, who cried at my wedding. I didn't know if that man still existed. Then, on a random Thursday at 8 p.m., my doorbell rang. No warning. I opened the door and my dad was standing there in his old work jacket, looking like he hadn't slept in days. In a voice I'd never heard from him, small, cracked, nothing like the loud man at the party, he said, "Can I see my grandson?" I said, "Are you here as his grandfather, or as the man who told 35 people he wasn't worth a toast?" His chin started trembling. This proud, stubborn man who has never apologized for anything in his life, looked at the ground with tears in his eyes, and said, "I was wrong, Opal. About Caleb, about the toast, about the money, about everything. Dean told me I'm losing everything that matters, and he's right." I opened the door wider. Caleb was watching his train show. My dad sat on the couch, not too close because I told him Caleb needs space, and just sat there. After a minute, Caleb glanced over. "Hi, Grandpa." "Hey, buddy." They watched trains together. No speech, no movie moment, just a grandfather finally being still enough to be there. Did I forgive him completely? Forgiveness isn't a light switch. It's a slow dimmer, but that was the start. Things changed after that. My dad joined a support group for grandparents of special needs kids. Aunt Lorraine found it. My mom started asking real questions about Caleb. Not what's wrong with him, but what does he like? Paige talked to Belle and Jackson. Really talked. Belle cried and said she didn't want to be mean to Caleb. Jackson, who's 6, said, "Caleb likes trains. I can like trains too. Kids are better than us when we let them be." My dad got a job at a hardware store. Not glamorous, but honest. Never asked me for money again. I started helping a little eventually, not $800 a month, and only because I wanted to. Uncle Dean and my dad had dinner in June, just the two of them. Dean told me later that my dad said, "I almost lost my daughter and my grandson because I was too proud to admit I was scared of a boy I didn't understand." Broke my heart and healed it at the same time. Last month, 4th of July at Uncle Dean's, the whole family. And when my dad stood up to toast, he said, "To all my grandkids, every single one, especially Caleb, who taught this stubborn old man that different doesn't mean less." Caleb wasn't listening. He was eating a hot dog and watching a caterpillar, but I was listening, and so is everybody else. Do I fully trust my dad yet? Trust takes longer than words, but he's showing up. For a man like Rick, that's everything. You don't owe anyone your peace. If someone hurts your child, you stand up, even with shaking hands. And if they come back trying to be better, you don't have to forgive instantly. You just leave the door cracked enough to see if they walk through. My dad walked through. Late, messy, still learning, but he walked through. Caleb still drives his trains, still says mommy pretty every morning, still has no idea that he changed this whole family by being exactly who he is. Thank you for staying with me through this whole story. If it touched you at all, a like truly means so much. And if you've lived something similar, or you see things differently, or you just want to talk, the comments are yours. I read everyone. Thank you for being here.